All right, welcome everybody. I'm Lucian Fogoros. I'm the co-founder of IoT World, and I want to thank the guest speakers today for being here today. Thanks to the 700 plus people from 80 countries for joining on short notice. Look forward to a successful presentation. Just a couple of reminders. The place where you would like to ask the question for the live panelists is in the Q&A. Feel free to leverage the chat options to tell us where you're from, but we do track the Q&A. And there's a reward for those of you that post questions there. We'll get a special invite to our VIP community. With that, I'd like to turn it over to just one more reminder. We have Troy Wilson from Siemens online as well. So we're monitoring the channels. Feel free to leverage the hashtag SIE_IIoT. Or just simply post the questions in a Q&A. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Greg Orloff.
Thank you, Lucian. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And once again, thank you for joining us, and welcome to today's virtual conference, How Industrial IoT and AI are Fostering Collaboration to Deliver ROI, brought to you by IoT World and sponsored by Siemens. And I want to point out that a large part of the value of these sessions that IoT World produces is the opportunity to engage with speakers live. So please do post your questions in the Q&A window here and also in the Zoom platform. You can also leverage Twitter and use hashtag, as Lucian said, hashtag SIE_IIoT. While you're getting acquainted with the Zoom platform, please drop us a note into the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today, and also perhaps what brought you here today, issue, a problem, or just general curiosity. We have representatives from Canalys and Siemens joining us today, and they have an exciting topic of discussion indeed. Our speakers are poised to provide keen insights into the emerging and rapidly expanding areas of industrial IoT and AI. So from an agenda standpoint, in these presentations and Q&A, we're going to discuss several topics: how to align business and technology to capture value at scale, top industrial IoT use cases that businesses can leverage to become more efficient in their operations, the power of an ecosystem in the IIoT space, and how to accurately calculate the return on investment of IoT initiatives. Great topics. We have a lot to cover, so please allow me to introduce our panelists. Our first guest is Mr. Jay McBain. He's an accomplished speaker, author, and innovator. He was named 2021 Channel Influencer of the Year by Channel Partners Magazine, Top 40 Under 40 by Business Review, Channel A-List by CRN, Top 8 Thought Leader by Channel Marketing Journal, Top 20 Visionary by Channel Pro, Top 25 Newsmaker by CDN Magazine, Top 50 Channel Influencer by Penton, Top 100 Most Respected Thought Leaders by VSR Magazine, Power Global 150 by SMD Magazine, and Top 250 Managed Service Executives by MSP Mentor. Jay is sought and sought after for keynotes, thought leadership, as well as future industry guidance. And he's spent 28 years in his career in various executive channel sales, marketing, strategy roles within organizations such as IBM, Lenovo, Autotask, Channel Eyes, Forrester, and now Canalys. Jay is the chief analyst for global channels at Canalys, the world's leading analyst firm with a distinct focus on channels, partnerships, alliances, and ecosystems. So please, without further ado, allow me to turn it over to Jay, who's going to provide some keen insights and market trends and challenges. Jay, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. And that was a very long introduction. We'll have to get that shortened next time, but really appreciate it. And I'm dialing in. I'm just watching where everyone is around the world. I think we've touched every continent so far, and great to have a global audience. I'm in Florida, so I just kind of battled through. We were on the East Coast, so didn't get the eye of the hurricane, but I got to fly into it yesterday coming from Las Vegas. So that's where I am in the world. Talking about the world, last year, there's $94 trillion spent in world GDP. You can see how it's broken up, and we've got representatives here almost in many of these places. And what I look at is the transfer of industry and how it plays underneath this, the movement of money, the channels, the partnerships, the ecosystems, the alliances that make it all work. So I'll be working on the collaborative part of this title, and then we'll get deeper into obviously industrial IoT and AI and other things later on. Next slide. Of the $94 trillion, 75% of that flows indirectly. You bought your last car from a dealer, you bought your last TV from a retailer, You bought your last jar of peanut butter from a grocer. So that's the way the world has pretty much always worked. Back to the trading days, trading post days, 1,000 years ago, farmers markets today. I mean, this whole idea of buying from others, where the big shift is happening now, and IoT is actually one of the industries that's pushing this, is it's less important where something's purchased, and it's more important about how something is purchased. And we're going to get in that today, and the importance of partnerships that go far beyond just how customers, end customers and governments buy. So next slide. What we do is break down, and this is a technology market element. So if the world is 94 trillion, about 5% of that is the tech market. And you have, for example, this industry, happen to be doubling in size this decade. So we've got, a lot of opportunity. And, we're in a market here, Industrial IoT by 2028, should reach pretty close to $1 trillion itself. Next slide. So I want to walk through a couple of customer opportunities. We're obviously in the middle of macroeconomic challenges and obviously other challenges we're facing in supply chain and obviously a war in Europe and other types of things. So I want to kind of come back to today where the money is being spent and where the opportunities are. And then we'll kind of go into some trends around collaboration and partnerships and how this is playing out. So on number one, interestingly enough, it's on automation. Companies are looking to modernize. They're looking to automate their processes and workflows, looking to automate business logic. And this is a big thing that's been fueling, IoT, industrial IoT, automation technologies like robotic process automation, which is on the software side, no code, low code. That's the number one spending area. We're up in the 70% yearly growth numbers in these segments. Next. Second is, obviously the movement to the cloud. IoT actually relies in many cases on, different cloud, whether it's public or hybrid or different kind of technologies. And we're driving the cloud infrastructure. And these projects are getting green lit at this moment, while other things are being tightened up. Number three, obviously the surface area is growing. And this is what we're experts in this market. And the threat vectors, there's about 100 new threat vectors being introduced each week. So in that world, the number three area of growth, where the cloud is growing at 40 to 50%, security is solidly growing at 30% at this point. And then number four, interestingly enough, if you go back to 2008 or 2000 in the middle of a downturn, companies are looking at it as a point of opportunity to come out of it stronger and look at partnerships and look at collaboration and look at ways in their business or within their governments to get more efficient. And they're looking to come out of it ahead. And so they're, in many cases, investing more at this point as a point of opportunity. So let's flip gears now and look at some trends that are happening. And I just want to touch on 5 of them in the time we have here in terms of kind of the future of collaboration, the future of partnering, and the future of how this is all going to work. Number one is really around the changing business models at companies. So if we go to the next slide, the number one, so Accenture did a worldwide survey and asked every CEO in every country, in every industry, and every size of company, and 76% of CEOs today around the world think that their current business model will be unrecognizable in 5 years. Very interesting. So when asked why, ecosystems became the answer, number one answer. So next slide, you start to look at what these business models are becoming. Companies in every industry are moving deeper into subscription and consumption. In the tech world, for example, big companies like Dell and Cisco and IBM and HPE and Lenovo and others have committed 100% of their business into subscription and consumption models. Direct to consumer is making a renaissance, but in the B2B space, product-led growth. If you happen to be in software today, your board, your investors are pushing you into product-led growth as a business model, usage-based and value-based pricing. And then this explosion of marketplaces, which in the North America today is about 1/3 the economy and growing. So all of these different models change how cars are sold. They change how banking products and fintech are doing things, how the future of pharmaceuticals, the future of manufacturing, the future of the tech industry. 76% of your end customers or your people you're working with are literally in a change of transformation, state of transformation. Next slide. The second thing is we're starting to learn much more about partnerships. When I said 75% of the world was sold through others, we tended to focus on that. And over the last 40 years, most of the focus has been on trying to sell more. And as we know, IoT, industrial IoT, AI, all three of those areas, those segments, they're not product SKUs as we know them that are sold in a linear way through distribution. They're building blocks. And now we know that there's 7 partners in the average size company and above that rely on 7 partners and they trust them. And so we're starting to learn more. So next slide. The global channel for what we're talking about here in terms of technology, automation, and driving new levels of transformation start to look like this. And it's different than in the past that every company in every industry is becoming a tech company. You might have heard like software is eating the world. Every professional services firm is coming in to be a tech services firm. So the conversations around industrial IoT are wider and deeper than ever before. And there's people in the room, these 7 partners that you might not have expected in the past. So it's a very big market. Next slide. The third thing is our buyers changing quickly. So you've got different psychology, you've got different behaviors, you've got a different buying journey now. The majority buyer of industrial IoT in 4 years will be a millennial. And on top of demographics, the pandemic shifted a lot of the ways that we buy. And so my recommendation, next slide, is to look at 3 different segments, how somebody gets to the point of vendor selection. And today, think back to the last time you bought a car. There's 28 moments. And it could be as little as watching a video, reading an ebook or something like that. Or later on, it's pretty deep, configuring, pricing, quoting. But all these moments become really important because most of them now are digital moments. And to be able to be successful and to get our solutions all put together as blocks in front of that customer outcome, we have to look at these moments more than ever. And at the end of the cookie, we can't just go buy these moments. We got to go participate in these moments. We got to know who the owner is and partner in all these specific moments to make sure we reach that point of vendor selection in our favor. Next slide. So from a partnership perspective, the time before, the influence before the purchase is just as important now as land, which in a subscription consumption model is only the first 30 days with the customer. And then everything goes to expansion. Every 30 days, adoption, integration, stickiness, upsell, cross-sell, enrichment. So each of these 3 areas are equally important now in the partnership game. It's not just about getting the deal. It's about all the different elements in that customer journey and serving them. The technology alliances, those building blocks, software, hardware, the strategic and business alliances. These are 6 swim lanes now of collaboration, and start to paint where those 7 partners in every customer are and what they're doing and how they make money in their business model. Next slide. So wrapping this up, kind of last 2, one is this embedded integrated future that I alluded to. One of the examples, next slide. One of the examples I use is a company that I worked with for 17 years. And for 29 years now, IBM has been the most inventive company by this measure, which is the most patents every year for 29 years. And some years it's not even close. What's interesting though, is they kind of missed the whole point about these building blocks. And if you look at the next slide, they've dropped revenue every quarter almost for 10 years. A couple of good quarters most recently, but they're half the size they were a decade ago. So how could be the most innovative company on that measure by over 29 years, continue to drop revenue, is that they didn't get, next slide, the fact that this was an ecosystem. This is a company that kind of missed the whole importance of that collaboration together to drive AI, to drive industrial IoT, to drive these solutions home. Those are 2 layers out of 7. And so the newest CEO at IBM recognized this. They're spending $1 billion. And we don't know if this is too late, but they understand the future of IoT and AI and automation and blockchain and quantum computing and the metaverse and all the other elements of emerging tech, which is here, are about ecosystems. And it's not about selling SKUs through distribution and not about salespeople selling products in the way that they used to in the past. Next slide. An example back to cars. 79% of people will not buy a car today unless it has Apple CarPlay, a tech integration, a UI UX module. And you can see version 2 here that goes from window to window up to your windshield. Apple takes over your speedometer, it takes over your gas gauge, the entire interface to the car, and all of the sensors and everything else. Industrial IoT has obviously been huge in automotive, but look at the challenges that a company like Ford or Mercedes or Volkswagen or Honda would have when they're giving up the app, the control of the car and the interface into the car. Next slide. I'm going to end here, which is the innovation around collaboration. So there's millions of partners. There's obviously millions of solutions, probably tens of millions of solutions. There's all kinds of noise and clutter in the market. And how do we bring together those 7 people? Next slide. I put together an islands of innovation or a landscape of all the technology companies building technology underneath this, helping us collaborate better, helping us co-innovate together, build value at the customer side together, leverage network effects in this explosively large industry that's getting larger, more people, more products, more solutions, and how to pull together all this to deliver and to obviously make money in whatever business model that you're thinking of. So this is one of those levers that I watch. These companies, these 223 companies raised $3 billion in private equity last year. There's a ton of innovation. We're calling this the decade of the ecosystem, which is boding really well for the future of industrial Internet of Things, AI, and all the technologies we're looking at today. So thank you very much for the time. I'll give it back to Greg.
Wow, fantastic overview. Rapid fire, Jay. That was incredible. From my standpoint, 28 moments along a customer's journey, and just that sheer fact that the vast majority of those are on the digital trail. So it's that digital transformation that we're talking so much about. Thank you. Fantastic. Our second panelist, we want to keep things rolling. So our next speaker we're going to move to is Ray Koch, and Ray serves as the Senior Vice President at Siemens Digital Industry Software, with insights on how Siemens empowers customers to enable next-level insights and operational efficiency with industrial IoT and artificial intelligence. In his role leading the cloud application solution business segment, Ray's responsible for Siemens MindSphere and industrial IoT and Mentor embedded software offerings. MindSphere is the industrial IoT as a service solution that Siemens connects real things to the digital world and provides powerful industrial applications and digital services to drive business success. MindSphere enables a rich partner ecosystem to develop and deliver new applications powered by IoT and analytics. As part of his current position, he leads major cross-functional business initiatives like the cloud and software as a service transformation of Siemens Digital Industries software product portfolio. Ray joined Siemens Software in 2001 through an internship with NX R&D organization. And from there, he's progressed in his career through global sales and services, NX and technology office organizations. He has both a BS and a Master's of Science in Mechanical Engineering at the Technical University of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And after 15 years of working from various office locations throughout the US, he recently co-located with Siemens Mendix team in Rotterdam, Netherlands. Ray, excited to hear what you have to say and
All
share.
right.
The floor is yours.
That was, again, quite the introduction there. And hey, thank you, Jay. That was very insightful. I'll try to make a couple of references because I think, Jay, what you talked about is very much also the view that we see here at Siemens. It's not just about being a software vendor in this place, but also how do you actually build up the ecosystem around you, right? And when I talk about the ecosystem, it's not just with other technology vendors, but also how do we do this actually together with customers. So what I'd like to hit on today is actually talk a little bit more about, okay, the what behind the capabilities. So meaning the capabilities that Siemens is delivering when it comes to industrial IoT and AI, and kind of the combination of the two. What I always like to say is that IoT without insights through AI means kind of nothing, right? Because it's just yet more messy data that you have to worry about. It's the insights from IoT data that actually makes this game kind of interesting. So if you go to the next slide. So therefore, if you look at the mission that we have here at Siemens Digital Industry Software, we're really trying to combine the two. So meaning we're trying to combine industrial IoT and AI to actually empower customers to enable next levels of insights and operational efficiency. And so the next levels of insight are actually kind of linking back to what Jay was talking about as to how this also can enable additional business models, right? So it's not about making the existing way of doing business maybe smarter and more efficient, but it's also, and you will see that in a couple of examples that I'll show here in a second, also make it smarter for customers to actually transition their business models, especially when we talk about the typical buzzwords that you hear, like equipment as a service or anything as a service, really, like Jay was referring to. So if we go to the next slide. So at Siemens, we're trying to take two views when it comes to driving these insights through industrial IoT and AI. One is from an integrated software portfolio point of view on the left-hand side. So our integrated software portfolio accelerator is actually using IoT and analytics as a primary component. So you will see that in the little circle there. And why this is an integrated component is because we're trying to actually use IoT and analytics to actually drive the entire value chain. And what I mean with that is from the initial conception of a product idea to the realization of the product through basically design, engineering, simulation, all the way to manufacturing, all the way to service, right? So we're trying to think about IoT analytics, not just as a standalone thing, but really how does it actually fit into the overall PLM process that we typically see at customers. The other view we typically take, which you see at the right-hand side, is actually enabling the full connected stack when it comes to technology that typically our customers are looking for, whether it's IoT for connected assets or whether it's IoT for connected shop floor, so meaning smart manufacturing, where really, if you think about it, Jay was kind of hinting at this in one of his slides. This is also about how you deliver new customer experiences on top of AI and IoT. And obviously, as part of our product portfolio, we also have a low-code offering with Mendex. And so really the comprehensive technology stack from low-code to cloud, with MindSphere, as you called out, industrial edge for edge compute close to your assets as well as your shop floor, and then obviously the integrated automation that has to go with it, right? Because ultimately you do this to actually make an impact to some type of operational process, which ideally you'd like to automate as much as possible. So next slide. So when we briefly talk about kind of the key value drivers, so really we're trying to deliver industrial IoT plus AI as a turnkey solution. And what we mean with that is obviously IoT on its own is a, let me just call it a bare metal technology. And it's all about how do you turn the IoT, basically IoT data and the fact that you have connected assets, how do you turn this into real solutions? So we're really trying to, for the industries that we serve, we're trying to really turn this into a turnkey solution. One of the things that is important, I won't go through all of the bullets here, is actually at the left at the bottom, you see industrial IoT data in context. So one of the things that a lot of people, I think, kind of miss about IoT is that just the time series data that you typically deal with in IoT is on its own maybe not so interesting. You really want to combine this data into, for example, additional data that you get from your shop floor, production orders, can be quality data, can be SCADA data. Bring this all together in context, because this is where you find new insights, right? It's not just about the data silos on its own. You want to actually contextualize this data, and then through AI, you want to actually reason over, okay, is this actually performing the most efficient way? Do I see bottlenecks that actually I need to be able to, that I should actually address? Are there new ways of applying maintenance that maybe actually would give me an overall uptime that is much better for the processes that I'm trying to sustain? So in addition to that, last thing I will call out on the slide is what we at Siemens Digital Industries Software call closed loop digital twin on the right-hand side at the bottom. So what we mean with that is, again, how do you bring this data actually forward into the, for example, the design and engineering of the product that you actually deliver as a company. And so it's kind of this shift left discussion. So how can you use data to make as many decisions as you can as early in the process as possible? And obviously, IoT is an interesting element because it's another element of data that talks a little bit about how your products are being used by the customer out in the field. So next slide. So at Siemens, we kind of think about a journey. So Jay was talking a little bit about land and expand. You kind of have to think about this path of IoT and AI as a journey. So meaning on the left-hand side, we typically like to see our customers start simply with what we call explore data. So meaning start your journey, start to connect your critical assets, start to actually get some insights from this data. So meaning get an understanding as to, okay, what kind of operational conditions do my products in the field run into? What are perhaps conditions that I never accounted for? What are maybe maintenance and uptime issues that I need to resolve, etc. And then all the way, like Jay was talking to the right-hand side, you can start using this data to actually not just think about how do I make the existing mousetrap better, but how do I actually monetize and maybe come up with a better mousetrap going forward. And that's why we actually also talk about how we help customers to transform business. A good example is this. I work with many machine builders around the world. They are obviously going through their own SaaSification services, basically as a service process for their assets. And so they really would like to actually add digital business on top of the traditional equipment that they sell, but ideally actually get to kind of a utopia state where you can start thinking about it as a service, meaning the digital service plus the asset as a combined value proposition, as a combined service offering that goes to their clients. So next slide. So then let's talk a little bit about this AI piece. That is maybe always the most nebulous thing. So when we talk AI at Siemens Digital Industries Software, we kind of think about AI for purpose. And what I mean with that is, especially when you get into machine learning, for example, it's not trivial to actually get these insights. And not always can you run your machine learning, for example, or you can just run it in the cloud. You also, in many cases, need to run it close to the assets that you're interested in. And so the first example I wanted to give here is what we do from an edge analytics point of view. If you think about operational data, there's typically a lot of high frequency data involved as well. And so you can think about, for example, the vibration of a drivetrain of a particular piece of industrial equipment. That's a typical scenario when you want to analyze vibration data and actually figure out, okay, is there any maintenance due, or is there maybe an issue with remaining useful life? This is when you want to actually apply analytics, and you want to actually bring this as close to the asset as possible because you're dealing with high frequency data that you don't want to send to the cloud. So again, a good example as to how to use analytics is, for example, what you see here, where you have your connected key automation components for a piece of equipment, including obviously the drives that go with it. And then close to, in this case, the specific asset, you want to run the analytics. You want to build up aggregates that then you can actually further process in the cloud for basically maintenance actions, for analysis of remaining useful life, or any kind of meaningful customer-facing kind of actions that you want to trigger as part of this. So next slide. So the other thing I wanted to briefly talk about is how do you actually make analytics easy? Because one of the things that I always struggle with is machine learning typically means writing a bunch of Python code, which not all of our clients are actually equipped to do so, right? And so one of the things that we've done is introduced what we call AI for everyone, together actually with a partner, TangentWorks, which is a technology based on AutoML, which actually is taking the hard part out of machine learning. And so maybe to give you an example here, if you go to the next slide and you let the movie play a little bit, what you see here is, yeah, so it's running here. So what you see here is, I'm going to go into an overview of my assets. In this case, I'm looking actually for a particular part of an assembly operation where I actually have one of my critical assets is actually a gearbox that is associated to the drivetrain for this production line. What I'd like to predict here is actually based on gearing temperature. I would like to actually figure out remaining useful life on the drivetrain, and specifically, I'm going to kind of use as a key indicator here gear bearing temperature. And what is interesting is that in this case, we're actually using machine learning to do forecasting. And the forecasting here, instead of you writing a bunch of models manually and you going into the depth of, for example, Python, you can, as you see here, you can set, okay, what is the representative time series data that I care about? What are the samples that I want to forecast? And you can immediately, based on the model building that happens in the background, actually build out the forecasting models that you're interested in. What we do here is these forecastings that are coming out of this, we're actually putting this back into the data that we have of this asset, so that you can actually start now triggering events, like for example, maintenance events based on forecasts that you actually have based on time series data that you actually get off this particular critical asset. And so this is a good example as to how when you combine IoT, AI, you can actually then start driving subsequent actions that maybe even in this case are actually due in the future, right? It's not something that already has occurred in the past. So with that, next slide. Maybe just hit forward, see if that works. Okay, seems like we have an audio or video challenge here. Oh, here we go. All right, so to wrap up my story, I just wanted to talk a little bit about customers and customer benefit. So the combination of IoT and AI, first example I wanted to bring is actually with a customer here, Yorkshire Water. They're actually a water and utilities company in the UK. This is an interesting scenario where, as part of their network, in this case, sewage network, they actually have these things called combined sewer outlets. It's basically a system, or it's basically a piece of the system that if there's excess water, it can basically open sewage to open water. Obviously, you want to prevent this as much as possible. And in many cases, actually, there are incidents here that happen because there's blockage or there are certain operational conditions on these combined sewer outlets that isn't correct. And so what we did here is we're actually monitoring all of these combined sewer outlets. We combine this with actually AI to then figure out, okay, at what point is actually maintenance due? And so as part of this, we're actually figuring out that a lot of these incidents where unwanted kind of disposal of sewage water is happening in open water can actually be prevented. And I think a good example as to how IoT combined with AI can actually, in this case, lead to basically combined value of lower incidents, but then also obviously an overall better performance of the system. And the last slide I'd like to highlight briefly is another custom example here, but the Hansa. So they actually built ventilation systems. It's kind of interesting for all sorts of public buildings, but also for swimming pools. And in this case, this is a good example as to how AI is actually used close to, in this case, the assets that control the overall environmental condition of, in this case, swimming pools, where we're actually using AI on the edge, so meaning close to the overall automation of the setup, to actually predict, okay, what is the best conditioning that I can apply to this particular environment. And it's combining, therefore, both our hardware setup, but then also combined with our industrial edge solution in order to actually help better predict basically the operational setup of the environment, and therefore actually as a result of it get far less energy consumption. So the last point I will make, final slide, and then I think we can go to Q&A, is, and last comment I will make is, do not believe that AI is actually the silver bullet. It's certainly not. So one of the things that we do in addition to integrating basically the AI technology into IoT is, like I said, as part of my introduction, the closed loop digital twin. And so the closed loop digital twin is actually taking IoT data that you get, in this case, for example, from a factory on the left-hand side, and combine that with simulation. The nice thing about simulation is that it's very good at including the physics, so meaning the actual physics of the environment that you're monitoring, into the picture. And so you can actually now have a combination of making predictions based on AI, simulation, which includes physics, and then obviously coupled with the actual environmental conditions as it's happening based on IoT data. And so we feel that with this, we have, again, a very comprehensive view as to how we can solve these kind of use cases that you saw here throughout my presentation. So with that, I will wrap it up and hand it back to you, Greg.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. It's time now to transition into our Q&A portion of today's session, where we're going to entertain the questions that are coming through from you, the audience. So as a reminder, you can shoot those into us through the Zoom tool here, or you can also send them in on the social channels with hashtag SIE_IIoT. And just a reminder, I know several of you have asked, this content will be available from today's session for live streaming after the conference concludes. So feel free to go back and watch it again if you'd like. In the event that time does not permit us to get through all of the questions that would come in from the audience, we will carry the conversation over to the social media channels and we'll address them there via Twitter. So fear not, we will get your questions answered. So maybe just to kick this off, Jay, you talked about market growth. What is the IoT or the IIoT market going to look like in a few years? Can you take out the crystal ball and maybe just give us a quick snapshot from your perspective?
Yeah, so there's a lot of views on what IoT versus IIoT looks like, but the consensus is we're at a couple $100 billion. There's averages up to 263 right now, which makes it an incredibly large market. It's obviously growing as well. I mentioned the cloud, I mentioned other growth rates in automation. So we're expecting by 2028 it to hit $1 trillion. And when you look at that bigger number, the global GDP, I mean, it's becoming a percentage of world trade in itself. So what a wonderful opportunity, I think, for everyone dialing in today and watching, and the broader ecosystem. Because every dollar of raw hardware or software tends to kick out about $6 of services on the implementation, the integration, the consulting, the design, the architecture, the security, the compliance, the governance, the data, the automation. You could probably list off 30 more, but all boats rise in this market, and every dollar, as was shown, really has a large opportunity and long-term opportunity to drive adoption and stickiness and everything else.
It's going to be interesting to watch it unfold. That's trillion with a T, ladies and gentlemen. That's a big number.
That's a big number.
Yeah, Ray, I want to address several people put a comment. I'm going to kind of paraphrase this. You talked about the importance of cloud and edge for AI, and IIoT. Can you elaborate on why the combination is important? Maybe dive into the nuance of that a little bit more.
Good point. So I talked about that briefly already in terms of some examples. it's all about where do you process what kind of data. That's what it boils down to. And so what we see is that, like I showed in the example, for certain use cases, you need to actually process what I call high frequency data. So vibration data is a good example. If you would actually over a day send all the vibration data of a typical drivetrain to the cloud, you would be looking at a pretty big bill and looking at a lot of data that is maybe not that interesting. So typically what we do at Siemens is we kind of look at the use case and then we figure out, okay, at what level, what kind of data needs to be processed. So therefore, when we talk IoT, we typically talk the different levels that I showed in one of the graphics, meaning edge, cloud, and then how can all this data be ultimately used in, for example, some kind of application experience. So yeah, I think for us, this is not just a cloud discussion. It's very much an edge discussion as well. And very much so because a lot of this data that we're talking about is high frequency. And if you don't analyze the high frequency data, you will lose a lot of interesting insights. You know, that's what it boils down to.
No, indeed. Thank you. A couple questions kind of paralleling that. And Bill has a question. He says, what capabilities should an organization focus on developing versus what skills are generally available from an ecosystem? Either one of you want to comment on that? Maybe Ray?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take it first. It all depends on, I think like the question hints at the competencies that you have. What we typically see though is that especially for IoT, people seem to be intrigued to always kind of make first. So meaning it's easy to get to your favorite hyperscaler, kind of pull out the tools that they have, both from an IoT and AI point of view, and start building, right? And then the reality sets in. So meaning now you have to worry about, like you mentioned, Craig, all the security concerns. You now have to worry about, okay, what does it actually mean to operate this at scale? Now you have to worry about all the other requirements that typically come. And so typically what we see is, yes, people like to kind of, for proof of concepts, kind of start to kind of build on perhaps what the hyperscalers have available. Typically then reality kind of kicks in, and then typically people like myself get involved, and then we try to actually take the use cases and make it scale. So that's kind of my view.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Yeah,
I'll jump in on that as well. In the tech industry, I think they're probably doing a better job right now of kind of enunciating what this opportunity is, in that they've quantified it. And I think in industrial IoT, kind of the next step is to what I call the multiplier. When I said that, you know, the first company to ever do it was Salesforce.com, a software company. And they come out, and Dreamforce was last week in San Francisco, and Mark Benioff, the CEO, got up on stage. First thing he said is, for every dollar of Salesforce, there's $6.19 of opportunity, over billions of dollars of opportunity for the partners in the room. Doesn't matter what kind of partner you are. And then further breaks it down into a pie chart to the penny. You know, here's how much the average consulting deal looks like as per every dollar of revenue that Salesforce sells. And then down all those services that I named off previously. But giving people a real idea, quantified idea of, can I make $2 as a services company, or $3 for every dollar of Salesforce? And can I make 75% margin doing that? And so Microsoft's doing a good job talking about trillions of dollars of opportunity for their channel. I think that Google is doing it at $5.70 right now. Companies like HubSpot and marketing. So in the IoT world, you know, I think it behooves companies like Siemens and others to kind of come out and start quantifying the opportunity. That doesn't mean the customer is going to spend all that money. They may insource a number of those things, and there's different kinds of partners that can take advantage. But, you know, we should start looking at this not just as the $1 trillion that I talked about by 2028, but really diving into almost the penny, where that opportunity is for everyone dialing in here, and how you build your business over the next few years to take advantage. What skills, what business practices, what M&A type of activity would I be doing to get out in front of this opportunity?
Yeah, that type of insight is always valuable, especially at the top of an organization too. That's what, you know, the financial folks as well as the CEOs are going to be asking for. I want to address Robert's question because he had this early on. He said, for organizations who are beginning their IoT journey, what would you say are the top 3 use cases where they begin?
Maybe I'll take a first crack at it. So typically it starts with some element of condition monitoring. So meaning it's either, if you're, for example, an industrial equipment manufacturer, figure out, okay, how is my equipment used in the field by my customers, and what can I learn about it? So I typically call that condition monitoring. It's basically, okay, what is the condition of the assets that I sell? How are they being used, and can I learn something from it? So from there, it kind of evolves. So meaning then you can think about, okay, for example, can I offer, like Jay was talking about, can I offer now to my client, based on this data, some new insights and some new value, right? And so therefore you can think about, okay, can I offer to my customer a better understanding what operational parameters I should actually use in order to get the best performance out of the equipment as it's being used? Or it can be predictive maintenance, right? Or it can be actually predicting how maybe the customer is better off having other configurations of the assets that you actually sell. So that's kind of from an equipment manufacturer point of view. If you are a manufacturer yourself, then it's typically what I see to be a very hot use case at the moment right now is energy management. So basically using the principles of IoT for tracking energy usage, tracking basically through OEE, so over equipment efficiency, all aspects of your production. And I'd say at the moment, especially energy management is a key thing, and I'd say especially here in Europe. Yeah.
I would say, yeah, from my perspective, that's right on. I think you want to look at the buyer type. You want to look at the sub-industry. There's 297 choices in IIoT of where you can go and focus. He mentioned Europe. You got to choose kind of geographically. It's very difficult to be global, just getting into a market. So you want to probably double click on a country, state, province, specific area. You want to look at the product segments. I mean, there are dozens of them, actually over 100 of them in IIoT. So, you can't be all things to all people. So looking at that product, looking at the segmentation of the market. Do you want to focus on Fortune-sized companies? Do you want to focus on the mid-market, SMB? Where are you going to be? You want to focus on the business models of how this is all going to work. So there's 6 questions you ask up front. But really early on, you want to understand, once you've made those decisions, what people read, where they go, and who they follow. 3 incredibly important questions. If you kind of know the magazines, the social groups, if you know the associations and the peer groups and the vendors and the distributor, there's 14 different spheres of influence that cover those first 28 moments. And this can all be done from a desk chair, using Google and doing a lot of internet, digital sleuthing. You can really figure out all of these different points of influence, understanding where the partners are, where the customers are, the conversations are being had, the opportunities that are there to cover. And again, you can do this research up front and build a network, let's say, of the 100 most visible and influential people in that very specific intersection of opportunity. And then if those 100 people know who you are, know enough to be dangerous, like the 30-second elevator pitch, and maybe would endorse you at the right time on their platform, that's how you get integrated into that intersection and start to make a name for what you're doing, differentiated from others. So it's specific activity tactics that you can run to go do that quickly.
Very great insights, Jay. I want to take, Sajid's got a question as well. I'm going to blow this out even a little bit bigger. He says, many pharmaceutical drug manufacturers still have strict policies on data security and cannot send data to the cloud. What's the future of on-prem AI? I mean, I think you can extrapolate that to many other industries in the energy sector, the nuclear sector, a lot of these other ones. So what's your perspective, both of you? I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Do you want to take that one first, Jay?
Yeah.
So go ahead. I was just saying, if you want to take that first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I mentioned security, for example, as the 3rd largest spending area. and pretty closely attached to the automation and the cloud, which are the first two. They go hand in hand. And obviously, we talked about the surface area, expanding almost exponentially. I mentioned 100 new threat vectors coming in each week. So obviously a big opportunity. Industry by industry are solving it slightly differently. And they're trying to solve it minutes before the government is getting involved. Because as you see in the EU, as you see in the US, you're seeing governments in, with bills and legislation, regulation, and governance that's starting to come in on behalf of IoT and calling it national security. So I think industry is trying to be one step ahead of that, but it's going to be a very interesting move, not only for pharmaceuticals, but in all the different areas.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I think pharmaceuticals is maybe just one of them. So I mean, if you look at the business we do at Siemens, it involves quite a few industries where, to your point, government has some elements, whether it's in the US, DoD, or it doesn't really matter. So therefore, I mean, if you look at back to kind of the cloud discussion, that's why one of the first conversations we typically have is, okay, what are really the constraints to your data? And so therefore, for example, with our Industrial IoT portfolio, we support both public cloud SaaS, but then also two elements of private cloud. So you can go virtual private cloud, or you can actually go what we call local or on-premises private cloud. And actually, we see quite a few of our clients that have to deal with these kind of regulations actually opt in for a flavor of private cloud. And quite frankly, the way that we've set it up, yeah, obviously the scale, especially when you talk about AI, the elasticity that you can get out of a fixed data center is obviously smaller. But the good thing is that when you look at the analytics that we apply, we're trying to actually, both on public cloud and private cloud, we're trying to be pretty smart about how we do the scaling, meaning how do we actually do the inferencing and everything that comes with it. So therefore, yeah, if you look at the way that we approach kind of regulated industries, we give therefore quite a few choices as to how you can actually use our technology. And private cloud, therefore, is actually kind of taking off, to be honest with you. Everybody was, at the beginning of the journey, the IoT journey that I joined, very much focused on public cloud because of the elasticity of kind of the environment that you can get out of it. But these days, data regulations and elements of government control are surely kicking in, and therefore, I think private cloud, yeah, it's going to be here, and it's going to be here to stay.
I don't think it's going anywhere either. We're approaching the end of the session. I've probably got time for one more question. Vishwas has got one. I think it's kind of a larger perspective too. He says, is IIoT really influencing the OT layer in terms of integration and outcomes? And are manufacturers willing to put data over the cloud? So maybe just kind of that step back perspective. Is that apprehension still out there about putting your information out there globally, or are we starting to overcome that?
I have a short answer for that. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think with all the customers that I work with, I think that's the biggest challenge, to be honest with you. How do you, and not just from a roles and responsibilities point of view between IT and OT, but also from the pure basics of networking. I mean, how do you, because IoT is connected things. So if you connect these things, I mean, now you start to span network boundaries, meaning OT versus IT. And so the challenge is still there. I think we're getting better and better as to how to solve this. We've seen many scenarios these days at Siemens, and I think we have kind of standard solutions for it. Is the challenge still there? Absolutely. And I'd say maybe that's one of the things where I'd say Siemens is, I think, a pretty good player here, because we understand both the IT, OT world, and not just from a software point of view, but also from an automation and networking point of view. And so bringing these worlds together, some more work to come, Yeah.
Yeah, I think a contrarian view to that as well is that the pendulum into public clouds might have gone too far, too fast. The excitement of pushing all the data to the cloud to do the processing and the storage and things, and what companies are finding is, and governments are finding, it's extremely expensive. So this new renewed argument about the edge and what data as it's consumed ought to be processed and, you know, kind of stored at the edge, and then only the outcomes of that get pushed into, you know, major cloud systems and things. So you're actually, from an efficiency perspective, from a performance perspective, latency, as well as just, you know, raw cost. The idea is putting more out onto the edge and then using the public clouds, which are getting more expensive, and you know, using that as the integration point. The data, the richness of the data is the outcome of the data, not in the data lake itself as it fills up. So I think you're seeing companies like Dell and HP and Lenovo and others see more opportunities at the edge now, to have that hybrid kind of argument. And I think over the next couple of years, we're going to get better quantitatively on what workloads ought to be where, and, you know, process the most efficiently.
I was just going to say, well said, and I think totally subscribe to that view. So very good.
No, outstanding information flow, feedback, and conversation. You know, and we could probably carry this conversation out for the next 3 hours, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time and what we had budgeted. So, thank you for taking the time to join us for today's session. And please do make it a point to visit our events page for up and coming educational webcasts, as well as events brought to you by IoT World, including several of our IoT World Day events. We have ICS Cybersecurity coming up on October 12th, so mark your calendars for that. And we have a new and emerging area that we alluded to a little bit today, industrial metaverse. We're going to be covering that in a session on October 26th. And then to wrap up the year, we'll be having IoT World's Manufacturing and Supply Chain Day. And, you know, several questions were in the chat that will get carried over to the social channels as well, but some of them were talking about the supply chain aspects. You might want to stay tuned for that as well. You can find additional information always at iot-world.com. And special thanks to our sponsor, Siemens, for today's educational session, and to our speakers, Jay and Ray, for sharing their thoughts, insights, and expertise with us. Outstanding. I truly enjoyed this session. And if you like what you heard today as well, I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social channels. Likewise, if you have suggestions for a topic or otherwise, we always welcome feedback. So drop us a message and let us know what your thoughts are. This concludes today's program. Thank you for joining us.